sort of boost that momentum for this, because one of the things we really want to talk today about in matching volunteers and finding ideal roles for your supporters is more of like a holistic approach, and how you can get started doing that from the very beginning. So what we'll cover today is what is volunteer matching. We'll talk about some of the benefits of volunteer matching and the challenges. And really creating a successful volunteer matching process is a work in progress. So it's got kind of, two sides of that coin, is that there will be some challenges, but you'll also see some of those things creating positive momentum for your program. Plus, we'll talk about practical tips and resources for helping volunteers find opportunities they'll love, which is, one of those things I know we all care about. So stay to the end for those practical tips for matching volunteers, and we'll kind of discuss how you can start matching volunteers before they even register, which I think is a great place to start. And then creating winning volunteer role descriptions, and also tools that can help make volunteer matching easier for you. So Elizabeth, I'll kick it over to you to start us off with this definition of what is volunteer matching, and also look to the chat to see if you all have some things you'd like to add on what is volunteer matching for you in your program as well. Elizabeth?
Yeah, no, I love this. Court always researches these topics for us, kind of pulling together our initial definition. And then, as she said, like, what does it mean to you? Like, how do you see it differently? How does interpreting what volunteer matching means to your organization actually make it more efficient, or what are the challenges? So in this definition, it's the process of pairing volunteers with roles that can align with their passions, spark their interest, or leverage their unique expertise. There's a little bit we'll talk along the way as we go, but it's part of, like I was saying Monday, it's kind of like a recruitment. You're really trying to see, who is this volunteer and what do they not think to even tell me that maybe their historical record includes, that I can start drawing out of them or see if they're interested in. So part of when you're matching a volunteer to an activity you're passionate about, interested in, able to do successfully, you're going to see that volunteer start to feel more satisfied with their experience. And that's that big retention that we're always talking about. How do you get them to feel like they've done a positive contribution so they continue to come back to contribute to that program or to your cause? So I think, things that are coming up for you all, AK, feel free to just kind of chime in if there's some voices you want to represent for us. But I think, like, that's where my head always goes, Court, is kind of, we quickly assess somebody and where we're going to put them based on what they responded to sometimes. And I find, even in our business, in a team dynamic, in a nonprofit dynamic, sometimes the first thing they do is actually not necessarily the best role for them or what they could bring to the table. So I think that's always where I like to start thinking about it. Like, how do we uncover more?
Yes, that's an amazing thing, because sometimes I've noticed is that you've got hidden talents right in front of you. And I have a number of stories from my own experience that definitely lend to that, and not knowing that certain people, maybe they did something in a job like 10 years ago that they haven't done in a while, but they're actually really proficient at it. But they've been coming and doing something else. And maybe you haven't even shared that your organization might need certain types of help, like help with things like social media. Maybe you've got volunteers who are currently doing something that's more in like the physical labor sort of, they're doing cleanups, they're doing like manual labor on property, and there's nowhere for them to even tell you that they've got additional skills that they would like to give. So some of that, thinking through that, the hidden talents pool that's probably right there in front of you. So let's talk about some of the challenges, because I prefer to always be pretty real about this, is that, Elizabeth, you say it so aptly, is like this is really tough, because with volunteers, they're like unpaid employees. So how do you incentivize somebody to want to keep coming, especially when they're tired or their life is busy, or like in the case of the volunteer program I work with, when the weather is bad and 100% of the work is outdoors. It's like really that, things become, all of a sudden people start not showing up. So how do you manage that? So these are some challenges that we've listed out, but you can feel free to share some of those in the chat as well. I'll read the first few, but I would say just number one is really volunteers not really understanding what it is, like, what's my role here? So really clearly defining those roles, because volunteers may be confused. They think they're there to do one thing, but really it's something else. And available opportunities not really being, tagged by skill or program or cause or activity. So when people show up, again, there's not like a real full understanding of why they're there, what they're doing. And that happens sometimes, especially when you have, a lot of needs and you're just trying to get people on site in the door. You've really got to start somewhere. But I think that's one of the challenges as your program is growing is how do you do that a little bit more? One of the challenges that I've run into is a lot with the volunteer program I work with is, needing multiple roles, but currently kind of calling it one thing, and really recognizing that actually that one thing is actually like 4 different volunteer types. Like it's 4 different people with different skill sets that all need to be present. So that's something that I've run into a lot, and I'm not sure if others have as well. Elizabeth, I'll let you keep on heading down that list there, and AK, please feel free to chime in at any point with anything from the chat from our community.
I think number 3 is an interesting one because we talked a little bit about that, and that, it's not easy to coordinate. And I think, from someone who does not know how to use pivot tables in Excel, when you start to think about how am I going to make sure that I have someone who's trained to lead the team, enough people on the team, and then the one person who can only do the one task that only that one person knows how to do, like that's a hard challenge to think about breaking it into roles and how you're going to make sure that that lead is always there and has enough bodies underneath them to get the job accomplished. Yes, it's by shift. It can be a challenge each and every day, each and every hour, which is partly why I think Court says it so well. It's not an easy job. And I think that's where some of the other ones here, number 4, opportunity descriptions are not clearly differentiated in communications. I think we talk about that one a lot. If you just aren't quite sure what you signed up for, you're nervous to do it. And then when you come in there and you're actually doing something different than what you thought you signed up for, that's also that disconnect. So how do we get very specific so that, I think Mike, if any of you joined us last time, was very he liked how specific the role he signed up for was, because he could see, I can do this. It's going to fit my schedule. This is the time commitment. This is the skill set needed. So he just felt very prepared before he even walked in the door to take on that experience. So I think that piece of how do we get that right so that we're talking to someone that we're not talking to and making sure we're informing, not having a way to, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, Elizabeth, that's a really great point. If anyone wants to go back to our video library on our Get Connected blog, the video library has all of the previous webinar recordings, and you can check out leading through every stage of the volunteer life cycle, which is what Elizabeth was just referencing. And we talk a lot about the communications that are needed at each phase of the life cycle. And sort of what you were just saying, Elizabeth, really reminded me of how each of those phases of the volunteer life cycle is a chance to really see, like, am I matching these volunteers appropriately? So just like how Mike had shared during that webinar that he really found an amazing volunteer opportunity description because, he's got a job, he's a busy dad, and, he needed to know everything before he even clicked to respond. So that organization did a lot of their volunteer matching through just the opportunity description. So really number 4 that Elizabeth was just sharing, it's like, it's a great opportunity to really start with the end in mind, with the very beginning. And that was what I really loved. So that's a good one to go back and watch too. But, and then further from there, Elizabeth, after he signed up, then they had to capture his information. So I'll let you keep going.
Yeah. Number 5, so not having a way to collect and store the data on skills and interests. So I think that's one where, yes, we work for a software company, volunteer management software. So there's a piece there, though, that the always kind of draw back software to automation. What are those things that you always need to collect every time that you can sort and filter off of? So whether it's a Post-it note, an Excel sheet, or you got it into management software, it's that idea of how do I know, we'll keep picking on Mike since he's not here today. I was telling Court, we'll bring him up again later if the unexpected that happens in your life. But when it comes to Mike, like, he has certain skill sets and interests. And if I know, based on his job description, based on the job he did prior to working with our team, based on what he did out of high school as his first job, if I've got a way to start to pull all of that out of a volunteer, then when I need someone who can do grounds maintenance on a Saturday, or who can come in and actually knows how to use Excel and help speed up our accounting because we have a big database issue ahead of us, like something like that are those things where I can say, let's recruit from this pool of people with a specific skill set. If I don't have that sorting and functional data points, then every time I have to kind of blast out to the masses because I don't have that intentional knowledge to know, ooh, I could start with this pool of people, and I bet in that pool, I'll find the hand raised instead of having to just kind of every single time tap the entire crew. I think the no central database is that same thing, is how do you pull it into one place? And I think that, I saw a couple of things on the side where part of the challenge of a volunteer program is really building your value in the eyes of the other departments and teams that you work with. So being able to be a resource for them, where when they say, hey, I think we talked about this earlier, I didn't get the budget for that extra headcount I needed to be able to take on this task this year. When that's happened, you as the volunteer coordinator or director are able to come to them and say, what is the skill set you were looking for? You needed somebody who could do these 3 programs. Let's put it into what we're offering out to the community to say, this is a specific need that we need a volunteer to take on for us. Part of proving value sometimes is showing them that you have these abilities because of the data you've been collecting to be a resource for the whole team, to find that person, to quickly pull more body counts because you have those causes and skills correlated. So when they say who could come on a Thursday afternoon, because you know who can come on Thursday afternoons that might be willing to do something a little outside their comfort zone because there's a need of the organization. And I think that's kind of the same thing, needing to recruit for additional roles, but currently focused on retaining. There's a piece we'll talk a lot more about, I think, in some of the upcoming slides, but how does that recruitment versus what you learn more about them versus getting them in the right role start to help that retention and that retaining of those volunteers?
Yeah. And I think there's like a really great dialogue that happens there, from the very beginning when someone's filling out maybe an interest form or volunteer application, or they're registering, like, can you collect those data points? Like, what skills are you, what kinds of activities are you interested? Do you have special skills you'd be interested in giving? Are there certain things that, certain times that you have available? I can say for myself, this is an interesting thing that we've chatted about, is that sometimes in volunteer life, people want to give something that's very much the same as what they do in their professional life. And then for other people, they really want to give something that's very different than their professional life. And maybe it's because they need a break. They don't want to get burned out on those professional things. Or maybe they want to learn new skills, or maybe they work at a computer all day and they really want to interact with people. Like, this is their chance to like have community connection. So kind of being able to collect those different things at the very beginning. And then, that extra step of actually being able to quickly email all of those people who said they're interested in working with kids, and making sure they're getting through those next steps of screening and onboarding. For me, I personally like to do the majority of my volunteer work in a way that's very different from my profession, but occasionally I will do things, more consultatively, like sporadically, that are more in line with my profession. So that's my personal preference. And I think that that's really interesting to kind of see, like, who are these volunteers? How do they feel? And I think like paying attention to things like that can help prevent burnout for volunteers. AK, is there anything from the chat that you'd like to share? I can't see it right.
We've got some good conversations going just about getting that leadership buy-in and communicating that return on investment of volunteers, as well as some internal delegation of those responsibilities and some helpful tools that have popped up about kind of organizing that. Because I'm here, I feel this in the depths of my soul, right? That having volunteers is so helpful, but you have to coordinate so much to make it happen, and you've got to be really organized behind the scenes before you can be successful in your mission. And hearing about some great ways to do that, and also continuing to really lean on those expertise of your volunteers. Some people might just be looking for a door in. They care about your organization already, they found you and they're excited to be a part of it. They might be willing to do whatever, but getting to know them and really experience and getting to expand on their experience and hear their stories, you can really find some meaningful ways to plug in.
So
I
true.
like some of,
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I was gonna say some in the chat, like just to bring it out, like you're learning something in the moment. Like I think there's been some great conversation around like, where did you hear about us? So you get that feel for which social media are working. What are you trying to, which department intrigued you most? So you can guide them toward that. I think one of the things though that I don't want to lose here, and we brought it up, we may talk about it more later, but we were talking about how change is happening. We started this whole conversation at the very beginning of the webinar where people are talking about like things have changed since 2020. How do we adjust with change? And I think that's where there's this piece where when you go to recruit, don't assume that the people you're talking to still have that exact same schedule, that exact same ability or skill set. That may have even changed for them where they can't come in person anymore. So I think that piece of when you're communicating, always have that moment, whether it's in an email or whether it's, you're pushing them toward, you told us you like to do this. In our system, we have them noted as they like to do this. If that's not true anymore, it's kind of like that. I don't know why I'm thinking the unsubscribe button, but it's almost like, something's changed. You want to unsubscribe? It's that unsubscribe button at the bottom and say something's changed. Let us know what's changed, or have that direct link that sends them right back into that profile that they created when they started, because you want it to be up to date. You don't want to just have them not respond because this is just not even them anymore. You want to have that opening for them to say, here's who I am now, or this is what I'm passionate about now, or this is how my schedule's changed, or my skills have changed. I've gotten burnt out on this one thing. I don't want to do it anymore. Can I do something different? Soliciting that feedback. Sometimes it's just asking that question. If you don't ask that question, they may never speak up. And I think that's what often can lead to someone just spiraling down because no one let them say, could I do something different? A different shift. I mean, change is, again, one more thing to coordinate, but I think it's that healthy life of that volunteer journey that you have to think through, that they probably necessarily won't want to do the same thing for more than a year, for more than a quarter. I think you've got some great examples out of your life of that too.
Yeah, I worked with a volunteer who had been in a position long before I ever got to the organization, but he had been doing the same exact volunteer role, volunteer shift, the same 4 shifts every week for 20 years. And I was like, wow, that's amazing, and everyone really relied heavily on him. So not only was he the only person doing that role on those days, but, he was a real leader. And he came to me and he said, I'm incredibly burned out. I feel like no one else can do this. And I was like, oh, I hear you, because I think we've all been there. Many of us have felt like somebody else couldn't, step into the role that we were in, and that the organization really needed us to keep fulfilling this one role. And so I said, hey, I don't want you to feel this way. Let's talk about it. And let's would you be willing to make a plan with me to transition you out of this role? And because we talked, we were able to make a plan where this person actually trained new people to fulfill the role. And so I think that was a really great scenario, because he wanted to move on and do different things in his life, and have a little more freedom and flexibility in his retirement. And I feel like, yes, you deserve that. You've definitely put some hours in here. but he was amenable to that idea of making a plan. And I think that that kept there from being, him being burned out and just not telling anyone. And then maybe one day I don't know what would have happened if he just one day decided not to show up, or he would have been there and not been happy about it for a longer period of time. But we were able to come up with a cohesive plan of a 3-month transition. And it was wonderful. And so we found other people. And one of the things I said to him is, he was like, I feel like no one else can do this. I feel like no one else can do this. I said, well, the thing is we don't actually know that yet. We don't actually know the answer to that yet. And I told him, I said, the way I look at it is I think that if it's time for you to move on, I'm grateful that you told me. And now we have to think that this might be the perfect role for someone else. And we just don't know who they are yet. So now let's go find that person and train them. So I was just very lucky that he was willing to go on that journey. And he, that was a real leadership thing for him to do. To continue to give up his time until we trained somebody else and they were proficient at the role, because it was rather technical. And I understood why he felt that no one else could do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just gonna say, I love those stories too, because they feel, in the chat, they feel like a failure sometimes. Like we don't have that position filled anymore. It's a failure. But I think what that story, but also, I've seen so many times when that person has to and does step down or over to another slot, it's amazing to see who steps in. Like sometimes that worst moment turns into, now we've got somebody new engaged. I think we've talked about it in our own, team dynamics. Sometimes just shifting who's in charge of something, just who the leader is going to be, changes the whole approach and the whole dynamic, because you've just got a fresh set of eyes approaching something that has been done the same way for, in that case, 20 years. So what would change? What would a new perspective bring? What can we let go of? What can we do differently? I think it's always hard when change comes, but I think looking back on change, sometimes those are the pivotal moments where a program really pivots and becomes something so much different and more impressive sometimes as well. Okay, I think you were going to bring up some more stuff.
Yeah, we've got some good stuff in the chat too about some past what you can do in your organization to prepare for change, with some, getting ahead of it a little bit, trying to slowly introduce change, providing support, and just some clear implementation. I think that transparency is key. They're already on board with your mission and they're excited for your growth, and they're going to be, they're ready to hear it. I hear some, challenges with technology and how organizations are changing and growing. And I think the more you can be transparent about that and communicate your plan and why you're changing things, I think is better. These people, they want to help you and they care, and they'll help you with that. That transition will be better if you're communicating through it, and you've got some people good on your team. I think that's really great to know.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that feels most important, because I've been very nervous during periods of organizational change, it's very hard to keep those deep breaths coming in, it's uncomfortable. I think the longer I've been, doing things, I feel like I've had to just come to a place of accepting that change is inevitable. And it's actually a part of our journey and our growth, with our programs or really anything that we're doing. And so it's kind of just, sometimes we don't always know when it's going to happen, and sometimes we do. And so the times we do, we try to plan for, and the times we're not aware of, we try to stay flexible, and get a little creative, and really just lean into your community too, to make sure you feel well supported as a volunteer leader. Just get all of those resources that you need to feel well supported, as well, when your role can get it can get bumpy out there, with lots of changes happening and turnover of roles and things like that. So, just knowing that change will come, and sometimes we have more time to prepare for it, and other times we just have to stay real flexible, real creative, and lean into our community of individuals and friends and professional support as well to help us manage that. So let's talk about some of the benefits of volunteer matching. Elizabeth, I'll let you take it away.
So volunteers can feel very clear about the role they've signed up for. So make sure they understand all the details, they're ready to participate, they know where to park, they know all of those little things. Volunteers know they'll receive training and the activities they're going to participate on. So I think that's one that I'm always I'll kind of follow you for a little bit, but I am of a personality that I want to make sure you're ready for me. So I think like just that moment of like, this is what we're going to do first, and then we're going to get trained. And you don't need to worry that you don't have experience in doing this before, because we're going to do the training first, and then we're going to do this. I think, when we started, we were talking about some of the hospice volunteers and some of the volunteer opportunities you do, Court, that are so complex. It's thinking through too, one of the changes we made, frankly, in our software was to have 2 routes, somebody who's just going to come in for the very first time, where we don't want any barriers to them showing up and having a good first experience. And then a secondary path that somebody can go down when they do need to go through background checks and training and be able to kind of start that journey, as Court said, to see how far they go, which role is going to be the right fit for them along that depth. I think that piece of just getting to know them, their roles, how it went afterwards. So not only are they ready to participate and train, but how did it go, so that improving the volunteer engagement in the community is supporting them. I want to pose that kind of to the chat. I know someone said very true. People don't really want to fill out surveys anymore. They get tired of them. There's a great article with great questions, but there's only a percentage of people that will bother to fill out the survey. So in the chat, if you guys have something that's worked really well for how you spontaneously but intentionally incorporate questions and feedback into your process, would love to see that. Because I think the idea is there of how, after they've done the activity or they've come back a second time, how are you getting in with them? Is it something where, getting that staff buy-in, that as they interact with these volunteers, we want to ask this specific question so that we can learn this if we need to make an alteration for the future. I think a lot of those pieces are so critical just to keep them supported.
Yeah. And you can choose to ask just one question. Maybe you have the same shift that comes up, 5 days a week. You could just choose that on Thursday, you're just going to ask everyone one single question. And that way you kind of get, can take the pulse, like, hey, how did things go today on and I like to ask people questions. Like I'll say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how are you feeling about your shift today? And that just, and it's like, when I say it like that, they're like, 4, and they'll answer me, and I can kind of, take a note on that, and I can just gauge sort of the temperature of how people are feeling. And so I think there's some fun ways that you can create, down here, we talk about creating more meaningful volunteer work with volunteer input and mentorship. I think we've got a great article on our blog about creating a leadership mentorship program in your volunteer program. And I think that mentorship is a great way to get feedback. Maybe you pair your volunteers with a volunteer leader, and that person is the person that kind of gives you the information, especially because, maybe only 30% of the people are going to fill out a volunteer survey, but how can you kind of continue to like stay in touch with the pulse of what's going on in your volunteer base? And if you can connect like newer volunteers to a volunteer leader who's really good at, chatting with people and kind of figuring those things out, then those can be the people who sort of report to you and let you know like what's going on and if people are feeling good about their roles. And I think all of that sort of leads to the sense of community as well, and engagement as well.
It's interesting too. I think, for those of you who do have people that are consistently in the same role, or there's only one role, it'd be nice if you had 2 roles, but you have 1 role. Like that is what you need to recruit for. I think that still it's building that full holistic picture around that volunteer. So your question might be like, what are you curious about? Is there anything you wish you knew more about? Because I think, of just little things I've done. We were collecting things for a family recently that we sent the clothes off to the family, but I didn't hear back. Like, and I don't need to hear back. That wasn't why we did it. But there's that moment of like, your volunteers may feel like, I'm this tiny slice of the puzzle and I'm doing this activity, but I'm curious if, when we helped pack this food, it went to how many families this year, or I want to see more of that engagement story so I can know, did this thing I do helped? Are you seeing something different? Sometimes they're not on the newsletter. They're not on the report that's sent out every year. So they really only see what happens in their shift, their window. And I think that questioning, as Court said, what would be meaningful for you guys to get an update on next time you're here? That simple question incorporated to enough people, you might uncover what is that powerful story they're all curious about, because they want to know that what they're doing is actually changing things in the cause that they're trying to impact.
Absolutely, Elizabeth. I couldn't agree more. And I had some fun ideas actually as you were chatting. I was like, oh, this would be great to think about for Volunteer Appreciation Month coming up in April. And, thinking about ways that you can kind of weave appreciation and conversation, hearing from your volunteers. So maybe you host like a coffee event, but you also do like a little mind map or something together, like an activity of, things that they love about the program, things that they, suggestions that they have. And so you can engage them and appreciate them and learn all at the same time. So kind of thinking that appreciation doesn't just have to be a gift. It can be a team building activity where you are also able to really sort of check in with these folks and make sure that that they're fulfilled in their roles, and that you're not missing any sort of key developments. Like maybe they got a new job, so they're like, oh, I have to leave, but maybe they can switch into a new volunteer role because they've got a new job. As many people have gotten new jobs since 2020, that was one of the greatest times of job turnover. And so probably, like Elizabeth was mentioning earlier, just checking in with these folks and saying like, has your schedule changed? Has your life changed? Like, so, it's been true of many of us, I think, since 2020. A lot of people have gone through big changes. They've moved across the country. So, just checking in with those folks about that. But there's some fun ways that I think that you can weave it all together. AK, is there anything I'm missing before we move on?
Yes. Actually, so I had something bring up a cool point about how we're matching our volunteers that are currently in our database to the right opportunities. And someone mentioned about also using some of these tactics to place employees or corporate groups into the right volunteer spaces. I see a lot of, crossover in that, of making sure we're understanding the company's mission or what they're trying to accomplish. And I think what you guys have is, this in-depth knowledge of what your organization needs, and communicating that with, organizations in your community that are looking for that social impact, that mission alignment. I definitely think that you can find a lot of similarities here when pairing those employees to your opportunities, but also, you're still getting that same feedback. You're still getting that buy-in. I would still consider an employee volunteer just like your other volunteers. Like, they are there to help make a difference in your organization. And you can help. I've worked with someone who's starting to do a pro bono volunteer program where they're bringing professional skills into a single cause nonprofit to help with that. Or even, you might have some mission alignment to gain more access in terms of their investment in your organization. You might find some more relationships there. So I definitely think that this can be going both ways with your, walk in the door volunteers, but also even your employee corporate partners.
I think there's two prongs I've seen a lot, is that to play off what you just said, AK, is that continuing education. It's kind of like where you're identifying in a company and you're saying this to an HR person, like if you're working on legal consulting or if you're working on something that has an alignment in a professional field, going to that company and talking to their HR person about, do you have younger professionals that you're wanting to grow up? We often think about board opportunities for those young professionals, but there's also things that can happen in just team leadership that you want them to have and learn how to lead a team, how to coordinate something, how to be, in charge of the schedule for something else, depending on the skill sets they're trying to grow in that employee, whether the employee comes or whether they're sent to you by their HR or by their leadership. I think it's helping them think through, they're going to be getting on the job life skills during this opportunity. If you can translate that can become a program for employee recruitment as well. I think the team building that's also one we've talked about in the past, is just, a lot of companies are looking for team building exercises where the employees afterwards can reflect on something they learned. They can see themselves outside of an office and how the dynamic might shift and how new personalities or leaders might emerge depending on the task. So instead of just having that be something where the company is looking toward purchasing, I think I said whitewater rafting in a meeting. I've done whitewater rafting a lot in previous jobs. I didn't know if they're like, you will bond through death like experiences, but that moment of like, instead of that, what could you offer that is a packaged project day that you could take out that they could invest in, that you're bringing the snacks and the resources, but they're investing in your services to run the day for them so that they get that very tangible experience of something that you have to overcome, whether it's a food insecurity project or whether it's something that they can work on with you that your team typically doesn't have time to do. Building it out so this feels like a program that can be something that can tap some marketing funds, some HR funds, some team building funds that companies do allocate. And they don't necessarily realize, oh, that could be part of my charitable giving, because they're just not thinking of it that way.
Yeah, and some of those, people that come in via teams, perhaps that's their first exposure to your organization is coming in via the team. Through their job or their school or religious organization, but they may sign up to come as individual and serve in a different role. And I can say too, to speak to the volunteer leader who was, referencing how extensive their process was for screening and training, and it's a big commitment. I will say that for me, about 10 years ago, there was a specific cause. I was completely unaware of it. And a friend of a friend introduced me to someone, and we sat and we had lunch, and they told me about their cause. And it was the first I had ever heard that this was an issue, right? And the commitment to volunteer with their organization was big. It was a lot of training. It was a lot of hours. And I literally went in one afternoon from not knowing that something was an issue to being there 20 hours a week. Like I went, so I realized that education is a great opportunity to help, from my own experience. And now it's a cause that I'm going to be a lifelong supporter of. But it was just something that was complex and I wasn't really fully aware. And so I feel like those educational opportunities is actually where you can start kind of matching people. Because if you go and you speak or you do a lunch and learn and you talk about your organization, you might find some people there who want to donate money. You might find some people there who want to donate some time, but you might find that person that has a transformative experience. And I can speak to that because that was what happened to me. And I know other people that has happened to, that once you have a transformative experience, I would say like people, especially things that have to do with the medical, health care and those sorts of things. A lot of people who are the best volunteers for those are people who've been through it themselves and their own families, because they're really compelled to give, and they're really compelled to share of their time and their experience. And so that's been true for me in my own life. And many other people I know. So I would consider, how can education and speaking engagements and lunch and learns or coffee afternoons where I invite people to hear more about the organization actually be the very, very beginning of my volunteer matching process, right? Because you're going to have somebody who has that real visceral response that they want to go the distance, of what your specific opportunity requires. Just some thoughts. And I wanted to share a little bit about that because some opportunities have a more extensive screening process. And you tend to kind of lose people along the way, right? If there's an application, an interview, a background check, and then extensive training and orientation, not everybody is going to make it through. So if like 30% of the people make it all the way through, then that means you have to recruit that many more people to start. And I do feel like education can be a very powerful tool for doing that. So let me know your thoughts. Has that ever worked for you or your organization? Elizabeth, do you know anyone else who's done anything like that? That's something I've experienced with a couple of different places that I've worked. And also,
I know that it's that spectrum. I think like every team I've been on, especially when you're coming out for like a corporate project, there's always that one person that's like signing up for another shift because individually they were touched. There's the person who can't wait to get back to the office because they were there because they got told to be. There's that spectrum. So I think to Court's point, like you can't stop making the pitch and telling the story, because you never know when that person will be in the group. I think also looking through your database, and we're going to get into tools and practices here, but looking through, if you're starting to record information, Court, if we pick on her example, if she has had that pivotal life-changing experience and she's now one of your volunteers, so you're asking, where do you work? And that's part of the feedback you're getting from them. Then, somebody going to her business, knocking on the door cold and asking them if they want to do a cause related team project isn't easy. If you're going with Court to her leadership team to say, this is a cause that really matters to one of your employees, she wanted to see if there'd be an opportunity for us to do more with you all. And we had some ideas. Here's 3 things that we do with other opportunities for businesses. So we're curious if any of these fit. Package it so you can control what it is that they might say, yes, we'll do that with you. So you can make sure it's sustainable. But I think that moment of look for those stars, look for those people that are passionate, that are there, that are connected to a network, a club, a group, a university, a school, a company, because they're your foot in the door. And usually they want to tell their friends and family what they care about, and their coworkers are often their friends. So just thinking through like how you help navigate those networks can be just a real strategic goal of yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you never know. It could be one of your, one of the corporate employees' brother that has been impacted by your organization, and you would not know that unless you're really asking those intentional open-ended questions to kind of create curiosity and get people to respond. I think a lot of this really is about, communication. So just really clear volunteer opportunity descriptions. And I think also on your volunteer site or your organization site, having your mission statement really accessible and easy to read for people is really helpful. And then really making sure that you've got those effective calls to action. So instead of just like, here's the link to sign up for our newsletter, it's like, stay in the loop, about what is happening in our community here, like really. So we've got resources and all of that in our learning center, on our blog. So you can use those templates and examples, because there's a lot of writing that has to happen in volunteer management, and it can be very time consuming to sit down and write your schedule and write all these opportunity descriptions. So we've created some like done for you resources to make that save you time. And then really using, this is one of my favorite ones here, second from the bottom, Elizabeth, is if you are using a centralized database, actually using the communication tools, like in Get Connected, we've got great communication tools where we can kind of pull up everyone who's interested in a specific cause and really send clear emails to just those people who are interested. As opposed to just like sending the email to everyone about this one thing. Really, they call, it's called targeted communications, but you really want to make sure that, am I giving these volunteers the right message? I think leaning into some of those tools like VMS to unify and automate these important functions of making sure that you are sharing the really specific messages with the right people, so that they're really hearing you. Yes, keep everyone updated, right? But the people that you're going to have the most like response from are probably going to be the people who've already said they're interested in this. Those are the most likely people. So really being able to like tag those people and send them an important message. Anything you'd like to add, Elizabeth, before I move on? So I want to make sure we have a little bit of time for questions.
Let's keep going, because I think some of the examples are good here. Yes.
So this is sort of the momentum. You got to have a Venn diagram, right? It's really kind of pulling together, like saying, okay, we've got our volunteer opportunity. We've got our recorded volunteer interests by, causes, skills, however you need to delineate that for your program. And then we've got our system. And when you've got all of those things working together, that's when you're really able to start matching volunteers, right? Because if your system is you doing everything manually, you can still do it, right? You've got your opportunities, you've got your interests by causes and skills, and you're kind of sorting through. It's still doable. It just might take more time. And that's where, technology can help automate certain aspects of your job. One of the things, Elizabeth, you said the other day is like, there are certain things technology can't do, like have a really great conversation with your people. And that's where your strength is. So if technology can free up any of your time to allow you to kind of lean into the things that are the sweet spot of your job, where maybe you don't have to lean on surveys too heavily because you're really able to have more conversations because you're not scrolling through Excel spreadsheets. Like, I don't know if anyone has been there as much as I have been. I'm not great with Excel and not good at scrolling through those sheets. Anything you want to add, AK or Elizabeth, before we kind of scooch on?
Yeah, I think the automation, I think that's the pitfall of a volunteer management system is you want to put into that the things that are automated. So data you're trying to learn, being able to make sure that they're still, passionate and the timing still works out for them in the future, automating them picking their schedule shifts so that you don't have to make the call every single time. They can hopefully 80% of your volunteers sign up for something, and then you're just filling in the holes for the 20% that's left. I think that piece is, as you said, Court, it's getting the weight of the things that happen over and over and over again that are just streamlined off of you so that it's not just, the sweet spots, which you've never been able to put enough of your time into, but it's also the things that just aren't like the rest, your oddballs that don't fit into the automation. Don't build process around those. Make sure you build a process for an oddball process, but it probably is manual. It's not worth trying to build automation around. So I think it's always holding yourself accountable to what's on repeat and what's just different that I just can't put into repeat. So let's not clog up things that I'm doing over and over again with things that are just not going to fit.
Yeah. And I think like thinking about all of these different pieces is where you're like, this is my whole process, right? This is my whole practice for volunteer matching. Now, some of it, like Elizabeth was saying, if you find yourself doing the same task 20 to 100 times or more a week, which I know some volunteer leaders that we work with have done and do, because you're all brilliant and amazing and you care so much. But if you find yourself doing the exact same thing 20 to 100 times or more a week, that's the time to bring in automation. If there's something that you're doing, once here and there, but it takes a lot of manual, effort on your part because a lot of conversation, a lot of like other things, that might be something that would be harder to automate. So that's just the way to sort of look at it when you're doing volunteer matching. One of the things that I have done that's been very effective for me sort of evaluating where I need to implement a new process or tool is I will time myself on how long certain activities take for me in my job, and I'll make note of it for like a week or two. And that is very enlightening. And definitely has made certain pieces of software easier for me to go ahead and make the decision to purchase, because I realized that there were certain tasks taking way more time than I was aware of. Very enlightening for me. So this is another tool in practice, and something that we've talked about a lot is just those volunteer opportunity descriptions. This is an example of one of the members of our Get Connected network, Golden Harvest Food Bank. They've got really clear opportunity descriptions. They've got skills that are tagged, and they also let you know what program it is. So you're really clearly aware of what it is you're signing up for. They've got even more there on their site. But this is just a little example of how you can start that volunteer matching process from the very, very beginning, before anyone even, clicks to respond to an opportunity.
I always like this example because it is ours, but it's got the skills. So I think like thinking through how everything you're putting out there could use multiple skill sets. In this case, there's someone who can lead teams, or someone you're going to be working with food prep, you're going to be lifting things, you might be able to donate toward it. There's going to be some manual labor, like kind of getting people thinking outside of like just one skill. This is a skill that requires, somebody may just need to be warm and welcoming at the front door. So we want a people person, and we need somebody else who's just on cleanup duty. And that's what they're thinking about, physical labor part. So I think, thinking how what you're recruiting for might appeal in different ways to different people, depending on what they feel like they're good at or what they can contribute. Then again, to what we've been talking about, if we put forth that skill, you can say, show me people who said they had it. even though this isn't perfectly aligned, I need more people. I need more people here who will be warm and friendly, because that's what we're missing. So I'm going to get my people that just want to have community coming to something that's more of an intentional skill set, because I want to have a greeter at the door next time. So I think that's the piece to like kind of think outside the box when you're organizing yourself, to really, tap into the automation that you can to collect the things that you're going to want to use to recruit with in the future.
Yeah. And I will say one of the programs I worked in, we needed people who were people and also really excited to do taxes, which you would think is like a funny combination. And I was surprised when I got to the chance to work with that program. There were a lot of really friendly, tax passionate people. So, and they loved working with all of the people every day. We served thousands of people with just 15 volunteers and one full-time employee and one half part-time employee. So it was kind of a phenomenal experience to see. AK, what kinds of questions? We've got a few minutes left. I just want to make sure that we hear from the group before we log off. About 7 minutes left for the end.
Yeah. We're just talking about some helpful tools people use to improve automation at their organizations. Love hearing all the different ideas and, different solutions for different sizes of organizations. And I think what's important to think about whenever you're deciding that is, what do you want to automate? What piece of this is going to help your life? What are you looking to be able to pull together? Also, what is the value of that? How are you communicating those results back up through your organization or through your funders, and making sure that data is really impactful? You can have your spreadsheets and you have all your things. Being able to tell that bigger story has a lot of impact, and can help your organization move forward and help you grow that base, because it can definitely be overwhelming to start doing all these things on your own. So yeah, there's a lot of great tools out there to help definitely improve that process.
Yeah, we've got a great blog post actually on our blog that has the 25 top volunteer management tools. That's a good one to look at and compare as well, based on your needs. And yeah, that's exciting. Anything else that we want to talk about? Just got a couple more minutes. I want to say I'm going to send you on Monday the volunteer matching planning guide that is going to lead you through some Q&As that's going to help you more clearly define current and future volunteer roles, to get kind of clear on some of those descriptions, evaluate opportunity descriptions, because there's always room for editing and improvement. A lot of times, we write those things and we're like, okay, it works. We let it ride for a while. The way I look at it is we're never going to get those things perfect the first time out. So we have to just get something out and then, we can revise, at intervals. And so I think there's always a chance for that, especially as your program grows and changes. And then also there'll be some helpful hints in there on evaluating your processes and your tools to simplify volunteer matching and help centralize your database. So there'll be some good resources in there. So please do look for that email from us on Monday. Any other questions before we've got 5 minutes left, so we could probably take one more, two more maybe.
No, we had a couple that I answered one in the chat, so I'll talk while anyone else who's typing, feel free to type real fast. But just how we package things. And I think that is one thing to think about, is just a concept, is your services, your time, the work you do has a lot of value. And while part of, I think, the volunteer experience is securing those donors, it's making sure someone sees an impact from what they're doing. Volunteerism in itself, you want to be able to tell your story, and you want to be able to show what you're doing in a really powerful way. And I think that's just coming back to that. If you're going to put together something that's a proposal for a company of a service you're going to provide, where you're going to orchestrate an event for them and you're going to help them brand it and have a meaningful experience for their employees, then don't hesitate to put value on that. That is something that you're bringing to the table and will take your team time to execute, that their staff doesn't have to spend time doing. So that is absolutely a value statement to make and to put into a proposal. Don't hesitate there. I think all day long, we all value the services of our nonprofits. And sometimes putting it in black and white makes people realize, oh, it actually takes them how many hours to put this together? I should pay them for that if I want to have this experience for my staff. My soapbox
I
there.
saw some questions about funding, and I'm not sure if I fully understand, but I'll do my best. I think we have a great webinar recording and set of resources in our video library section. AK, if you can find that, if you go to the blog and hit the video library, it's all about growing your program through corporate partnerships. And we talk about a lot of different ways that those partnerships could bring funding into your organization. We also have a recent article on our blog about volunteer donorship. So those might be some helpful links for you to check out. There's a few different methods for doing that. And I think it's a very important topic because the majority, 76% of volunteers donate their money to the same places that they donate their time. So there's some resources on our blog to support in that. Yeah, absolutely. And Dollars for Doers is another sort of program that you can kind of check out with the corporate partnership. Yeah, mostly today we wanted to center the conversation on finding the ideal, just roles for volunteers. And, when volunteers are really excited and they feel like they're doing a great job, they're just more likely to also give in other ways. That might be in-kind donations, it might be cash donations, and it also might be spreading the word about your volunteer program and your organization. So absolutely, we've got a number of resources for you on that that have to do with giving to charities in other ways. So we are almost right here at the top of the hour and want to say thank you so much to all of the volunteer leaders who were a part of this conversation today. We just really value you. And we're definitely here for you. This is what we're trying to do, is create resources and support for the volunteer leadership community. And we also want to hear from you. So please do make sure to stay connected to us. Again, we are Get Connected by Galaxy Digital. We are a network of 50,000 nonprofits and over 2 million volunteers on our software platform, Get Connected. We create volunteer management solutions for every organization, program size, and budget. So if you want to learn more about that, you can reach out to us at info@galaxydigital.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, but we are accessible to you at galaxydigital.com/blog for all of our volunteer leadership resources. And thank you so much. Please look for that follow-up email from us on Monday. And big thank you to Elizabeth and AK for being a part of this today.
Thanks, guys. And do join us again in March. I think volunteer appreciation, great ideas coming. So those links will be included and you guys can go ahead and get it on your calendar for the next time around.
Yes, absolutely. We are going to get ready for Volunteer Appreciation Month in March. So we'll see you then.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Have a great